Hi, I'm David Fuller. I'm a senior counsel with McDermott, Will & Emery in the Washington, D.C. office. Welcome to Tax Takes. I'm sitting here today with Andrew Liazos, one of our partners in executive compensation out of our Boston office. We're going to be talking about executive compensation and the impact of tax reform on Section 162M. And in particular, Andrew, we have individuals who are interested in the impact of tax reform on 162M and what it means for their companies and their executives.
Well, for tax departments, there are really three things to focus on right away. One is to identify traps for the unwary for our human resource professionals. Second, we need to figure out the areas where we need to identify arrangements that need to be protected. And third, we really need to plan for ongoing compensation in order to make it more tax efficient as companies focus more on the cost of providing these arrangements going forward.
What would some of those traps be that you've seen?
Well, traps are really with respect to loss of grandfathering status. Under the tax legislation, there's a transition and grandfathering rule for written binding contracts. If there's a material modification to those contracts, that transition rule status will be lost. What that means in practical purposes is that deductions with respect to those arrangements that might otherwise be taken will be lost. So what are the types of modifications that we find as a problem? Deferred compensation arrangements in many cases have changes that are made in the normal life cycle. For example, companies might want to change their earnings measures. They might want to allow executives to continue to defer their compensation. And right now, we advise not to do any of those things because they could result in a loss of the grandfathering treatment. Secondly, there are many issues with respect to performance-based awards. If changes are made to the way those amounts are calculated, then you can also have a loss of deductibility. A third area to focus is with respect to employment agreements and severance agreements. In many cases, when an executive leaves the company, there will be situations where there might be a desire to renegotiate in some way that contract. If there are material changes made to that contract, amounts that would otherwise be deductible could very well be lost. And so we want to urge care with respect to arrangements that would be grandfathered for which there would be a transition.
Andrew, these changes seem to impact public companies, but do they also impact private companies, or is the primary impact on publicly traded companies?
It affects publicly held companies that are listed, like it always did, but it also affects two other different types of companies as well. If you're a private company and you have publicly issued debt, this provision will apply. In addition, if there are multiple entities within the group that issue publicly traded debt, you may have more than one set of 162M limitations to think about. In addition, you could be what is called a foreign private issuer, a company outside the United States that has publicly traded securities but that are not listed on New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. In those circumstances, those companies could also be subject to 162M.
Andrew, does tax reform have any carryover or impact at the state and local level to the executive compensation issues that Congress enacted?
It really has a state impact as well, and it really needs to be thought about in a holistic way. For example, there are states that do not follow the federal rules as amended by the tax reform. And so therefore, there can be deductibility under the old rules where you do have the performance-based compensation exemption. And so if you have an effective state tax rate that is pretty high in states where you get to use the old rules, it's worth thinking about, well, gee, does it make sense to gain flexibility in terms of how you structure compensation with a tax cost that could be fairly extreme to do that? So don't forget the cost of moving away from traditional arrangements in terms of the state tax cost.
Thanks, Andrew. That was very informative. For more information, please reach out to our website, mwe.com/tax reform. Thank you very much.